This is a two-part local history presentation. No quiz this week. In this part, I'll introduce you to George McKesson Brown, who built his chateau-inspired mansion we now call Quandra Hall. In part two, I'll talk about the mansion and the estate itself. There is not a lot of public information out there on George McKesson Brown, certainly less than we know about our other former wealthy residents of the time. The Huntington Township has a few Gold Coast mansions that are still standing. We have the Vanderbilt Estate in Centerport, Fort Hill with William J. Matheson, which is now in private hands, the Marshall Field Estate in Comset State Park, and of course, Otto Kahn's Ohika. Another one listed on the National Register of Historic Places is a mansion that today is known as Quandra Hall on Huntington Harbor. George McKesson Brown's roots run very deep with well-heeled ancestors. His mother was not only a potential heir to the McKesson Pharmaceutical Company, but her grandmother was in the family tree of the Oyster Bay Roosevelts. George and his sister Catherine were listed in the Book of Bruce, ancestors and descendants of King Robert of Scotland. George Bruce started the Bruce Type Foundry. John McKesson, his grandfather, was co-founder of the McKesson pharmaceutical business. Catherine Lorillard Wolfe of Lorillard Tobacco was worth about $279 million in today's dollars when she passed away. Her father was one of the founders of the American Museum of Natural History in New York. I have not found any direct evidence that George ever worked for a living. Most of his fortunes came from the inherited real estate that the Brown and Bruce relatives left him, and I'm talking about prime Manhattan real estate in quite a large area of Throgs Neck. He is often referred to as a pharmaceutical magnate, but as far as I can find, he never worked in the pharmaceutical industry or anywhere else. George's mother, Virginia Greenway McKesson, died 18 hours after giving birth to him. His father passed away when he was 14. So George and his sister Catherine were under the guardianship of their stepmother, Ruth Arabella Loney Bruce Brown. As crazy as it sounds, due to second marriages in the family, Catherine's stepmom, Ruth, also happened to be her sister-in-law. As a newly of-age 21-year-old wealthy New Yorker at the turn of the 20th century, George and his wealthy friends like Stanford White, the architect, likely participated in the entertainment of the time. Parties, certainly men's clubs, big toys like yachts and race cars, variety shows, and burlesque. His main yacht was an auxiliary schooner named the Monimia. One popular variety show was the Florodora Girls. There were many Florodora girls during their time, and they all had one mission, and that was to marry a millionaire. Pearl Stilson was a chorus girl and a Florodora girl, at least until it was reported that she refused to kiss one of the guys during a show. Pearl was born in Youngstown, Ohio. Her mother, Matilda, who was born in New York, was apparently an entertainer of sorts at one time, probably wanting to return to New York for greener grounds. She may have pushed her children into show business because after the family moved to New York, 3 of the children listed actor as their occupations on the census. Within a couple of years of moving to New York, Pearl had a child at 19, but not with a millionaire, but rather with a starving actor, Walter Long. Pearl was listed as Pearl Long on the birth certificate, but I haven't found any marriage license for the two or even an indication of divorce. But soon later, Pearl did land her millionaire, and that was George McKesson Brown. Can you only imagine what his high society relatives thought of George marrying a chorus girl? In 1906, George and his new wife could not avoid the wrong attention, thanks to Pearl's sister Frances, who was apparently known in the entertainment circuit in Brooklyn. In that year, a brouhaha erupted when the sister filed for divorce from her first husband, Frank Messerschmidt, son of a wealthy merchant. She claimed he was having an affair with a coat check girl. He threatened to reveal scandalous stories about the Stilsons. She threatened to shoot him if he said a word about her mother or the newly minted Mrs. George McKesson Brown. He claimed that he and Frances went through 4 marriage ceremonies, none of which were legal. He also stated that Pearl influenced his wife to lead a life in which wine and cigarettes were regarded as necessities rather than luxuries. In 1906, George purchased a Mercedes race car from William K. Vanderbilt, which was entered in the Vanderbilt Cup race of that year. His driver was William Lukin, who was the last living driver of the first ever Vanderbilt Cup race in 1904. It has been suggested that in this picture from the grandstand of the 1906 race, the man in the suit and tie with his head down reading a program is said to be George McKesson Brown. One of the fashionable ladies in black or white could be Pearl Brown. George was an active yachtsman, so when his love for race cars waned, he spent more time sailing aboard his schooner yacht, the Monimia. In 1910, George inherited more money when the properties owned by his great-aunt Matilda Wolfe Bruce were sold. The greater part of her estate went to George, his sister, and his 2 half-brothers. Her real estate holdings alone sold for $3.3 million, equivalent to about $64 million in today's dollars. Around this time, George commissioned architect Clarence Luce to design a large French chateau-style house on waterfront property George purchased from Juliana Ferguson. Perhaps he got the idea from a visit to France with his new wife, because they had been out of the public eye for a little while. And very soon, a new Gold Coast mansion will rise along the harbor's edge. And this is where I leave you today. In part 2, I'll talk about the chateau he built and the series of events in his life that would test any person to the limit.